P.2, Economics, written November 2024. Okay, right. So now let's check question 1. 1.1, various options are provided as possible answers to the following questions. Choose the correct answer and write only the letter A to D next to the question numbers. An example is given inside the bracket where you're actually given 1.1.1 to 1.1.8, and you're expected to write that inside your answer book issued to you. Okay, right. So now one of the mistakes that I've actually observed is that most of you guys, you fail to follow the instruction where you only select the letter of your option or the variable of your option. Some of you select the option as a variable as well as the concept or definition next to it. Know that the moment you do that, you are not following proper instructions. So now at the end, you will actually face disappointment. Okay, right. So now let's check 1.1.1. A business that has no influence over the market price is called a price taker. Okay, right. So now moving on to the next one, we have 1.1.2. High development costs are frequently a reason for a monopoly to actually take place, which is a natural monopoly. Okay, right. So now let's check 1.1.3. The shutdown point for a perfectly competitive firm. The shutdown point for a perfectly competitive firm. Okay, right. The shutdown point for a perfectly competitive firm is where the average revenue is equivalent to average variable cost. So now it means the appropriate answer in this regard is going to be A. Okay, right. So now let's move on to 1.1.4. When the government passes laws to reduce market failures, it is referred to as a direct control. So our appropriate answer in this regard is going to be D. Okay, right. 1.1.5, the inflation target range used by the South African Reserve Bank is 3 to 6, which is option A. So now let's move on to question 1.1.6. The minimum length of a stay for tourism activities should actually be a day. Okay, right. So now let's move on to 1.1.7. So now 1.1.7 reads as follows. A sustained decrease in the prices of goods and services over a period of time is called disinflation. Okay, right. Because disinflation is actually associated with the prices, but when it comes to deflation, it is associated with the cost of production. Okay, right. So now let's check 1.1.8. It reads as follows. The process of removing trees from the land without replacing them is known as deforestation. Okay, right. So now let's move on to 1.2. So now 1.2 reads as follows. Choose a description from column B that matches the item in column A. And then you are expected only to actually write a letter from A to I as indicated on the on the question. Okay, right. So now under column A, we have the concepts given. Column B, remember, you can actually be given the features, functions, also types and the likes. So now then column A, we have 1.2.1 where it reads short run. So now normally this short run it is associated with what at least one vector of production remains fixed. So now it means in this regard our appropriate answer is going to be E. So now let's check the patent. When it comes to patent, we actually check an exclusive right to manufacture a particular product. So now in this regard, our appropriate answer is going to be I. Okay, right. So now let's check 1.2.3 minimum prices. So now minimum prices, it is actually in line with what provided. Minimum prices is actually in line with F. So now if you check F, it is actually imposed by the government to allow producers of essential goods to be profitable. Okay, right. So now let's check community goods 1.2.4. So now 1.2.4 community goods, we check normally they are provided for free of charge by the government. So meaning our appropriate answer in this regard is going to be J. So now let's check 1.2.5 where we have GDP deflator. It is actually in line with converting nominal prices to constant prices. So now our appropriate answer in this regard is going to be B. So now let's check 1.2.5 where we have outward tourists, where South African residents are traveling to other countries. So in this regard, our appropriate answer is A. So now let's check our conservation. So now conservation is in line with looking after natural resources to ensure that they are not completely used up. So now our appropriate answer in this regard is going to be D. So now let's check pollution. Pollution is actually introduction of waste material into the environment. So in this regard, our appropriate answer is going to be C. Okay, right, grade 12s. Let's move on to the next question. So next question, we have 1.3, where you're expected to give one term for each of the following descriptions and also write only the term next to the question numbers 1.3.1 to 1.3.6 in your answer book provided. And also in this particular type of questions, you are not advised to give abbreviations, acronyms, and examples will actually not be accepted. Okay, right. So now let's check 1.3.1. The value of inputs that are owned by the entrepreneur and used in the production process. So now this is nothing but implicit cost. Implicit cost. So now also 1.3.2, when the average cost of production decreases as the output produced increases. So now this is nothing but economies of scale. Economies of scale. Okay, right. So now let's check 1.3.3. The lowest amount of money that employers are required by law to pay their employees. So now this is nothing but minimum wage. This is minimum wage. Okay, right. So now let's check 1.3.4, an increase in prices that occurs when the aggregate demand in the economy exceeds the aggregate supply. So now this is going to be demand pull inflation. So now this is demand pull inflation. Okay, right. So now let's check out 1.3.5. It reads as follows, refers to the culture, history, and environment that is unique to a specific culture or society. So this is indigenous knowledge. Indigenous knowledge. Okay, right. So now let's check 1.3.6. Natural resources can be replaced or regenerated. So now this is what renewable resource. Renewable resource. Okay, right. So now let's move on to question 2. So now question 2 reads as follows. 2.1 in particular. So now 2.1 reads as follows. Answer the following questions. So 2.1.1, give any two examples of markets that may be regarded as perfect combination. So now this includes crop farming or basic bread production. So now we are saying that this include what? Crop farming or basic bread production. Okay, right. So now let's check 2.1.2. Why is cost-benefit analysis important for public projects? Remember, cost-benefit analysis is a tool that a government uses to check whether a project is worth taking or not. So they actually check what? They actually check the benefits against the costs. If there are more of the benefits than the costs, then they normally choose such project to actually undertake. Okay, right. So they were saying that due to the government shall know if the project benefits exceed cost, or if a project is worth taking. Saying that government 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 will know if the benefits of the project exceed the costs. So meaning if benefits are greater than costs, then the project is worth taking. Okay, right. We are saying that the government will know if the benefits of the project exceeds the costs. Meaning if benefits are greater than costs, then the project is worth taking. Okay, right. So now let's move on to 2.2. Study the extract below and answer the questions that follow. Monopolistic competition. In any city, many restaurants compete based on the quality of their food and prices. So the basic concept of providing hospitality services differs when restaurants change their strategies. So now one restaurant might charge 150 for a pizza and burger combo, while another might actually charge 180 rents for the same order. So the price of the dish can depend on other vectors such as the quality of the ingredients used or the restaurant's location. So its popularity and other services they actually offer. So now this product differentiation is a key element of the restaurant business. Okay, right. So now identify an example of non-price competition in the extract above. So now it can be what? It can be the location. If you want to beat the competition, make sure that you check the location where your business is going to be located. So now in that regard, it means that you are not going to tempt with the prices that you have actually set for the products or your services. Okay, right. So now let's check out 2.2.2. Name the type of profit earned by monopolistic competitor in the long run. So now the fact that this is monopoly business and monopolistic actually competitor in the long run. So now monopolistic competitor in the long run, they're actually are going to what? Going to make what normal profit. They're going to make normal profit because remember, this market structure, they are not alone. They still have other competing businesses in the market. So now remember, also there are some slight restrictions in terms of businesses that are willing to join the market. So now in that regard, it means that there will be a lot of businesses joining the market in the long run because they will actually see that in the short run, these businesses under monopolistic competition are making economic profit. So now that is why most of them, they're actually going to be captured or attracted to join the market in the long run. Then the fact that now businesses are going to be many, and then they are going to share the market. So in that regard, they are going to make a normal profit. Normal profit. Okay, right. So now briefly describe the term monopolistic competition. So now when we talk of monopolistic competition, these are actually what the market where we have some little barriers to entry, and also most of these businesses, they all sell similar but slightly differentiated products or services. So in short, you can divide it as these are the types of businesses with competition, and barriers to entries are very slow, and they all sell similar but slightly differentiated products or service. Okay, right. We are saying that these are types of the markets. These are types of the markets with competition, and barriers to entry are low, and they sell similar but slightly differentiated products or service. Okay, right. So now let's move on to 2.4.4. Explain the role of advertising in a monopolistic competitive market. So now the role is to increase awareness about their products or services. So now the role to increase awareness of the product or about the product or services. Okay, right. So now let's check 2.2.5. Okay, right. So why does a monopolist enjoy greater profits than a monopolistic competitor? Remember, a monopolist, we actually refer to those businesses that are operating alone in the market. They don't have any competition. And also, obviously, remember, when it comes to barriers of entry and exit, but what the entry is totally or completely blocked. So now that is why you actually see that even them in the long run, they are able to make what? They are able to make economic profit, short run economic profit, long run economic profit. Why? Because they are alone in the market. They don't have any competition. Unlike monopolistic competitors, because now in the long run, there will be many in the market, so they end up generating normal profit. So now we're actually saying that due to entry for new businesses is blocked for monopoly businesses. Also, there's no competition in a monopoly market. We are saying that no competition in a monopoly market. Okay. Also, we are saying that entry for new businesses in a monopoly market, is completely blocked. Okay, right. So now let's move on to the next question, grade 12s. So now next question we have 2.3. Start the graph below and answer the questions that follow. Positive externalities of education. Okay, right. So now 2.3.1 reads as follows. Identify the curve that represent the marginal private benefit. So now the curve that represent that, we have this curve which is D curve. Okay, right. So now let's move on to 2.3.2. Give any one example of negative externality. So now one of the examples we have what? We have air pollution. We have air pollution or noise. Noise can actually be an example of a negative externality. So now let's check the meaning of externality. So now this are actually what? The cost or benefits spilling over onto a third party but not involved in the initial what transactions. We are saying that these are costs or benefits spilling over onto the third party not involved in an initial not involved in an initial transactions. Okay, right. So now let's check 2.3.4. Why is our quantity Q1? Why this quantity Q1 regarded as socially efficient? Okay, so now this is actually socially efficient because the market fails when consumption is lower than the level of Q1. We are saying that the market fails because the market fails when consumption is lower level of Q1. Okay, so you're saying that the market fails when consumption is lower level of Q1. Okay, right. So now let's check 2.3.5. So 2.3.5 reads as follows. How can the government encourage the consumption of merit goods? By actually reducing the tax on merit goods and also subsidizing production of merit goods. Okay, right. You're saying that reducing tax on merit goods and also we are saying that subsidizing production of merit goods, production of merit goods. Okay, right. So now let's check 2.4. So now 2.4 reads as follows. With the aid of a correctly labeled graph, explain the relationship between total cost, fixed cost, and variable cost. So now if you still remember, total cost is equivalent to fixed cost plus variable cost. So now let's check how we can represent this graphically. So now graphically we can present it like this. So now here we have quantity, and then this side we have what? We have cost. Okay, right. So now remember we have what? We have the fixed what? The fixed cost. So now this is going to be our fixed cost graph. So now we also are going to have our total cost. Then from there we are going to have our variable cost. Okay, right. So now we are actually saying that variable cost remains the same over all levels of output. So now if we check that variable cost remains the same over all levels of output. So also total cost, if you check total cost, it begins at the same point as what is at the same point as a variable cost. Why? Because at 0 units, the only cost fixed what they are fixed cost. So now there's no variable cost at 0 units of output, as when nothing is produced, so no labor or material are actually needed. Okay, right? We are saying that variable cost remains the same over all levels, of output. Okay, right? We are also saying that total cost begins at the same point at the same point at with a variable cost, because at 0 units, the only costs are fixed cost. Okay, right? So now we are saying that there is no variable cost at 0. It's supposed to be okay. It's supposed to be fixed cost. Sorry. Okay. So there is no fixed cost at 0 units of output, as when nothing is produced. Nothing is produced. No labor or material needed. Okay, right. So now let's move on to let's move on to 2.5. How can a lack of information by various market participants lead to misallocation of resources? Okay, right. So now we are saying that entrepreneurs may lack information about the cost, availability, and productivity of the some of the vectors of production. And also workers may be unaware of job opportunities outside their current employment. Also, in order to make correct decisions, consumers needful information about the product and ingredients. Okay, right. We are saying that entrepreneurs may lack information about the costs, availability, and productivity of some of the vectors of production. Okay, right? And also we are saying that workers may be unaware of job opportunities outside their current employment. And also we are saying that in order to make correct decisions consumers need full information about the product and ingredients. Okay, right, grade 12. Then let's move on to the next question. We have question 3. Okay, right. So now moving on, we have question 3. So now in particular 3.1 1. So now name any two types of consumer inflation. So we have headline inflation, we have core inflation, we have CPI, which is consumer price index, and also have administered price inflation. Okay, right? We are saying that we have consumer price index. We have core inflation. So now also we have headline inflation and also administered price inflation. Okay, right, grade 12. So now let's check 3.1.2. Why does the government levy or impose taxes on tourism activities so as to increase the national income or government revenues? To increase government revenues. Okay, right. So now let's move on to 3.2. Start the cartoon below and answer the questions that follow. Okay, right. We have the impact of inflation on consumer. We have less real debt value we have less real savings value, we have less real income value. Okay, right. So now we have the overall inflation indicated under the cartoon. Okay, right. So now 3.2.1 reads as follows. Identify a positive impact of inflation on the consumer in the cartoon above. So now what we see is that we have less real debt value, which is our appropriate answer. Less real debt value. Okay, right. So now let's check what 3.2.2. Name the institution that uses interest rates to control inflation in South Africa. So now the institution is South African Reserve Bank. But when I remember, you write it in full, South African Reserve Bank. So now let's check 3.2.3. So now 3.2.3 briefly describe the term stagflation. So now stagflation is where a country persistently suffers from both high inflation and high unemployment. Okay, right? We are saying that this is a situation where a country persistently suffers from both high inflation and high unemployment. Okay, right. So now let's move on to 3.2.4. Explain the impact of inflation on taxpayers. So the moment there's inflation, remember when you talk of inflation, we actually refer to the general increase. It should be persistent, the persistent or continuous increase in the general price levels of goods and services. So now it means that the more there's a persistent or continuous increase in the general price levels of goods and services. So now it means that even the value of money is going to actually lose value, so or actually decline. So it means in that regard, taxpayers are going to pay more. They pay more on tax charge. Okay, right. So now let's move on to 3.2.5. It reads as follow. How can natural disasters contribute to inflation in the economy? Disasters lead to a maximum rise in consumer prices. Also, disasters destroy crops, buildings, and infrastructures. Okay, you're saying that disasters disasters destroy crops, buildings, and infrastructure. Okay, right? So now also we are saying that disasters lead to a maximum rise in consumer prices. Okay, right. So now let's move on to the next question. So now the next question we have actually we have 3.3. So now 3.3 reads as follows. That the information below and answer the questions that follow. So we have regional changes in tourist arrivals. So now we have millions on our y-axis, and then x-axis we have overseas arrivals and SADC arrivals. Although tourist arrivals from other African countries have exceeded the pre-pandemic levels, so now there is a possibility for a complete recovery for the South African development community and overseas regions. So now let's check 3.3.1, identify the number of SADC tourists arrivals in the fourth quarter of 2023. So now if you check fourth quarter of 2023, we actually have 1.7 million, 1.7 million. So now this is our appropriate answer. Then let's check 3.3.2. Name any one environmental heritage site in South Africa. So now we have Robben Island. We have Robben Island. Okay, right. So now moving on to the next question, we have 3.3.3. Briefly describe the term domestic tourism. So now domestic tourism, it involves traveling by the residents of a country within their own country. So now we are saying that now we are talking of what traveling involves traveling involves or involved by local or residents of a country within their own country. So traveling involved by residents of a country within their own country. That is our domestic tourism. So now let's check 3.3.4. Explain the impact of a weaker rand on foreign tourist arrivals. So it actually there will be an increase in the number of foreign tourists. So it means that there will be an increase in the number of foreign tourists. Okay, right. So now let's check let's check 3.3.5. How can the South African government ensure that tourists visit their various destinations across the country? So now this can actually be done through improved political climate, also international events. So now we are saying that this can be done through improved political climate and also we are saying that also via international events. Okay, right. So now let's move on to 3.4. So now 3.4 reads as follow. Briefly discuss export earnings and government expenditures as causes of our demand pool inflation. So now we are going to check our export earnings. So now export earnings, they actually contribute to demand pool inflation because of different demand for goods and services. Also, it places a strain on the limited production and supply. So now moving on to government expenditure, the government participates in the market on the demand for goods and services, and therefore responsible for the increase in the price level. Okay, right? So now let's check 3.4. So now we actually have export earnings, and also we have government expenditure or spending. Okay, right. So now we are saying that under export promotion, it contributes demand pool, inflation, because foreign demand foreign demand for goods and services, and services. And also we are saying that it places a strain on the limited production and supply. Okay, right? So now under government expenditure, you're saying that the government participate in the market on the demand for goods and services. Therefore, responsible for the increase in the price level. Okay, right. So now let's move on to 3.5. So now 3.5 reads as follows. How can tourism activities negatively impact South Africa? Okay, right. By degradation of the environment, also increased government revenue, and also development of tourist facilities on scarce land. Okay, right. We are saying that degradation of the environment, then increased government spending, also development of tourists facilities on scarce land. Okay, right. So now grade 12, let's move on to the next one, the next question, which is question 4. So now question 4 reads as follow. It reads as follow, question 4. So now 4.1.1, name two types of inefficiencies. So now remember, under inefficiencies, we have a productive inefficiency and allocative inefficiency. Productive inefficiency and allocative inefficiency. Okay, right. So now let's check out 4.1.2. How can the South African Reserve Bank use open market transactions to reduce money supply in an economy? Okay, right. So by lowering interest rates and buying of what bonds, lowering interest rates and buying of bonds. Okay, right. So now let's check 4.2, study the graphs below and answer the questions that follow. So now 4.2.1, identify the curve that represents the supply curve for the individual firm in the market. So now that is going to be marginal cost. Okay, right, state the name, the nature of the product sold in a per market. So now they sell identical product, or homogeneous product or same product. Okay, right. So now let's check the definition of marginal revenues. So now 4.2.3 briefly describe the term marginal revenues. Okay, right. So now marginal revenues actually changes in total revenue. Total revenue when extra unit of output is sold. So now you're saying that this is a change in total revenues when an extra unit of output is sold. Okay, right. So now let's move on to the next question, which is 4.2.4. Why is the individual individual firms demand curve horizontal? Because they are all the price takers. Because they are all price takers. Okay, right. So now let's move on to 4.5. Use the graphs above to explain how economic loss in the short run leads to normal profit in the long run. Okay, right. So now if you check MC, which is a marginal cost, represent the short run marginal cost of individual producer. So the short run average of the individual producer is represented by AC. So at their profit maximization point, the AC for the individual producer is actually P2. So now because average cost is higher than average revenue, this firm will make economic loss of P minus P1 minus P2 per unit. So meaning that at point E1, the average cost is equivalent to average revenue being equivalent to price 2, but only under normal profit is actually being generated. So in the long run, businesses are producing at lowest possible average cost. Okay, right? We're saying that MC represents the short run marginal cost of individual producer. Also, we are saying that the short run average of the individual producer is represented by AC. And also we are saying that at point at profit maximization point, the average cost for the individual producer, is P2. Okay, right? We're also saying that AC is greater than AR. This firm will make economic loss, where we have P1 minus P2 per unit. And also we are saying that at point E1, the average cost is equivalent to average revenue is equivalent to P2. Only normal profit made. And also we are saying that in the long run, businesses are producing at the lowest possible average cost. Okay, right. So now let's move on to the next question, grade 12, which is 4.3. So now 4.3 what reads as follow. Study the images below and answer the questions that follow. So now we have image A and also image B, South African tourism. So now 4.3.1, identify the image that relates to eco tourism. So now that is going to be image A. Okay, right? So now let's move on to 4.3.2. So name the institution that is responsible for promoting tourism in South Africa. That is Theta. So this Theta stands for tourism, hospitality, and sport, education, and training authority. Okay, right? So now let's check what 4.3.3 briefly describe the term paleotourism. So now paleotourism is where tourists visit sites of archaeological importance, where tourists visit sites of archaeological importance. right? So now 4.3.4, explain the impact of households' income levels on tourism. More income implies more tourism and vice versa. More income implies more tourism or increase in tourism. Increase in tourism and vice versa. Okay, right. So now let's move on to 4.3.5. Why would South Africans be discouraged to visit tourist sites within their country? It's because some of South Africans are used to those areas. So now the fact that they are used to those areas, they don't see any need for them to visit those areas anymore because they are already familiar with those areas. Also, some of these tourists, they actually want to explore something new, unlike actually visiting the same place time and again. So now we're saying that some South Africans are used to the tourist sites. So now also you're saying that so some South Africans want to explore new things. Okay, right. So now let's move on to 4.4. 4.4. So now 4.4 is as follows. With the aid of correctly labeled graph, explain the effect of maximum prices on what on the market. Okay, right. So now this is the graph. We have supply, we have demand, we have Q, then we have P. Here we have a price. Then this side we have a quantity. So now we have our maximum price. Maximum price. Then here we have our Q1 and then our Q0, then our P star. Okay, right. So now in this regard, we also have our equilibrium. So now at maximum price reduces the price for consumer from P to P star. So the availability also drops from Q to Q0. Okay, we are saying that the maximum price reduces the price for consumers from P to P star. And also we are saying that the availability Availability drops from Q to Q0. Okay, right. So now let's move on to 4.4.5. Analyze the measures that can be used to combat cost push inflation in South Africa. So now long-term increase in productivity, also price control is a direct method. Wages can only be increased if they are accompanied by an increase in productivity. Also encourage personal savings so as to facilitate investment. Okay, right? You're saying that price control is direct method. Is a direct method. Okay. So now also we are saying that encourage personal savings to facilitate investments and also you're saying that long-term increase in productivity and lastly wages can only be increased if they are accompanied by an increase in productivity. Okay, right. So now let's move on to section C. So now section C reads as follow. So now in particular, we are going to check question 5. So now remember, creators, whenever you are faced with this particular type of question, you already know that this 6 months question, it is your main body. And then this 10 marks question, it is what your additional part. So now you only have to come up with your conclusion as well as your introduction. Okay, right. So now let's go through this and actually check. So now the question says, examine in details the oligopoly market structure. Okay, right. So now under introduction, you can actually say that the oligopoly is a type of imperfect market in which only a few large producers dominate the market. Okay, right. So now let's check the nature of the product under oligopoly. So now the product may be homogeneous in pure oligopoly. So if the product is differentiated, it is known as a differentiated oligopoly. Okay, now let's check our market information. There is incomplete information on the product and the prices. So now coming on to market entry. So when it comes to market entry is not easy. It is limited in the sense that huge capital outlay might be necessary. Also checking the control over the price. Oligopolies have considerable control over price. It can influence price, but not as much as the monopolist. Okay, right? So now oligopolies can frequently also change their prices in order to increase their market share and this result in price wars. Okay, now let's check our mutual dependence. So the decision of one firm will influence and be influenced by the decision of the other competitors. Okay, right? Also, mutual dependence exists among this particular type of businesses. A change in the price or a change in the market share by one firm is reflected in the sales of the others. Okay, right? So now let's check non-price competition. So non-price competition can be through advertising, packaging, after sales, and also services. So now let's check also services or sales price competition can actually result in destructive price wars. So now oligopolies normally prefer to compete on a different basis. So participants observe one another carefully. When one oligopolist launches an advertising campaign, its competitors also is going to follow the footsteps, because the moment they fail to follow the footsteps, then in the long run, they're actually going to be affected in the sense that they're going to lose the market share. Okay, right. So now also if oligopolies operate as a cartel, firms have an absolute cost advantage over the rest of the other competitors in the industry. So moving on to collusion. So now collusion is a strategy used by firms so as to eliminate competition amongst each other. So now also it can be in the form of overt collusion, where firms can work together to form a cartel, and tacit collusion, where a dominating business controls the price. So now also let's check limited competition. There are only a few suppliers manufacturing the same product. So coming on to economic profit, oligopolies can actually make an economic profit over the long term. So now abnormal profits may result to joint decision making in an oligopoly. So now coming on to demand curve, the slope from left down to the right, also it is known as the king demand curve. It contains the upper relatively elastic slope and the lower relatively inelastic slope. Okay, right. So now let's check our additional part. How the competitor policy helped to reduce anti-competitive behavior in South Africa. The moment there is a competition, what the competition in South Africa. Remember, we have what the Competition Act of South Africa, and now this Competition Act of South Africa has actually been established to promote competition in in different set of markets. Remember, the competition is actually being promoted so that consumers won't be exploited. Also, so that consumers can have a wider variety or range of goods to choose from. Okay. Right. So now, this competition, the moment it prevails, remember, there are different bodies that are designed to make sure that businesses are dealing with competition or follow the rules and regulations of our Competition Act, where we have competition commission that goes straight on the ground to check if businesses are following the rules and regulations of competition. And then if businesses are failing to follow such rules, then remember this competition commission will report to competition tribunal. And the moment the competition tribunal fails to deal with the matter, then he can actually refer the matter to competition appeal court. Okay, right. So now in conclusion, we are going to say in South Africa, oligopolies have been found to be illegally manipulating prices to their own benefit, yet to the detriment of our consumers, and have been penalized for such an action. Okay, right, grade 12. So now let's check our question 6. So now if we check question 6, in the same manner, we have our main body in this regard, and this is going to be your additional part. So now you only have to come up with introduction of 2 marks. So now after introduction of 2 marks, then you can also conclude whatsoever information that you have indicated. Okay, right. So now this question 6 reads as follows. Discuss in detail how the government can ensure sustainable development. Okay, right. So now granting property rights. So now property rights are laws that govern how individuals can control, use, or benefit from and transfer resources. So now property rights have positive conservation effects because they ensure that people take care of their property they own. They will use it profitably for as long as possible, even for generations to actually come. So now to prevent fauna and flora species from becoming extinct. So now the government can allow people property rights over them. So now property owners can then preserve the environment as a little cost to actually taxpayers. So now property rights can be expanded to common goods such as clean air. So now Kyoto Protocol is an international agreement whereby developed countries pay developing countries for their right to pollute, also pay for environmental use. So now we actually check under pay for environmental use. So now the government can protect environment by imposing user fees and charges on individuals who use or damage the environment. Also, government delivers fees for waste produced and dumped in the environment. So now also in South Africa, local authorities charges on water rubbish collected and also sewage disposal. So now charges should be proportional to the waste for the best results because a fixed total charge will not encourage waste producers to reduce waste. Also, let's check levy environmental taxes. So these are also known as green taxes or eco taxes. So now government imposes these taxes on consumption of a good that has negative impact on the environment and is not for the good of the environment. So now an example of a levy on plastic bags, filament light bulbs, tires, and etc. So now to achieve a social efficient output, the rate of tax should be equal to the marginal external cost. So now let's check pay environmental subsidies. So now in this regard, the government pays a subsidy to firms that enable them to reduce pollution levels by a certain percentage or below a certain level. So now for a typical example, government subsidies, new technologies, government normally subsidizes new technologies that saves energy such as energy saving bulbs or solar geysers. So now also let's check the issue marketable permits. The government issues a permit to each firm which allows certain amount of pollution, so this sets a standard. So now firms are allowed to trade the permits to other firms that have a larger pollution level. So now when increasing output, each firm can decide whether it is more profitable to buy permits for additional pollution or to alter this technology to produce less pollution using its current permit. So now command and control. So now maximum permitted levels are set. For typical example, we have emissions, minimum acceptable levels of environmental quality. So inspectors normally monitor the activities and impose fines if the legal limits are not respected. So now also there are three approaches to devising command and control system. Okay, right. So now let's check quantity standards. I'll focus on quantities of pollution and cost irrespective of the environmental impact. For typical example, we have car gas emissions. Also, you have a voluntary agreement. So the government tries to enter into voluntary agreements with businesses to cut pollution rather than imposing laws and regulations. So these agreements include formal contracts or informal commitments that businesses negotiate so as to suit their own circumstances. So now let's check education. It is used to try to change people's attitude towards the environment. Innovative approaches have been tried in the developing world to educate people. Also, education should include aspects of indigenous knowledge systems because indigenous people have a broader knowledge of how to live sustainable. So now people should also be made aware of environmental issues and the consequences of their actions. So now to make the consumption habits more environmentally friendly. Also, education plays an important role in improving people's ability to manage the environment. So now the environmental agreements. So now the government concludes agreements with businesses on voluntary basis to cut pollution. Okay, right. Great talks. So now let's check the analysis on the international measures to reduce environmental impact. Okay, right. So now there are actually different protocols, like P.2 protocols, that have actually been put in place to make sure that there is a control and monitoring of pollution around the whole globe. So now most businesses are expected to actually follow the guidelines as are given or actually shown or indicated inside the P.2 protocol. Okay, right. So now let's check our conclusion. So in conclusion, you can actually say that all individuals, businesses, governments, and other organizations should take care of the environment by being engaged in projects that will promote sustainable living. So now, grade 12s, at this juncture, I would love to say thank you very much. Surely you enjoyed a lesson. Shalom. Okay, right, grade 12s. We are going to discuss paper 2, economics, written November 2024. Okay, right. So now let's check out question 1. 1.1, various options are provided as possible answers to the following questions. Choose the correct answer and write only the letter A to D next to the question numbers. An example is given inside the bracket where you're actually given 1.1.1 to 1.1.8, and you're expected to write that inside your answer book issued to you. Okay, right. So now one of the mistakes that I've actually observed is that most of you guys, you fail to follow the instruction where you only select the letter of your option or the variable of your option. Some of you select the option as a variable as well as the concept or definition next to it. Know that the moment you do that, you are not following proper instructions. So now at the end, you will actually face disappointment. Okay, right. So now let's check 1.1.1. A business that has no influence over the market price is called a price taker. Okay, right. So now moving on to the next one, we have 1.1.2. High development costs are frequently a reason for a monopoly to actually take place, which is a natural monopoly. Okay, right. So now let's check 1.1.3. The shutdown point for a perfectly competitive firm. The shutdown point for a perfectly competitive firm. Okay, right. The shutdown point for a perfectly competitive firm is where the average revenue is equivalent to average variable cost. So now it means the appropriate answer in this regard is going to be A. Okay, right. So now let's move on to 1.1.4. When the government passes laws to reduce market failures, it is referred to as a direct control. So our appropriate answer in this regard is going to be D. Okay, right. 1.1.5, the inflation target range used by the South African Reserve Bank